Entrepreneur MBA podcast purpose is to help existing business owners grow their companies past the 10 million in revenue per year benchmark. Here is your host, Stefan Halasnik.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Stefan Halasnik, and I am co-founder of Financing Solutions. Financing Solutions provides very easy to set up lines of credit for small businesses, and I will be your host today for the Entrepreneur MBA podcast. If you are interested in learning more about the business line of credit, which I highly recommend, I think everybody should have a business line of credit just in case, then please visit our website at fscreditline.com. That's FS as in Financing Solutions, creditline.com. Over the last 25 plus years, I have built 6 companies in the $5 million to $25 million range, including 2 companies on the Inc. 500 fastest growing list. I love learning from people and with business experience. And today I'm very excited to be speaking with Stefan Georgi from Accelerator. Stefan is considered to be, by many, to be the world's best active copywriter, having sold over $1 billion in products and services with his words. He's also an accomplished entrepreneur who has founded or co-founded 9 different businesses that have scaled to at least 7 figures, with several of those businesses reaching the 8 or 9 figure mark. Today, Stefan spends much of his time focusing on his Accelerator mastermind group, which helps freelancers and entrepreneurs to create sales funnels that can reach scale and impact more lives. Stefan, welcome to today's Entrepreneur MBA podcast.
Thank you, Stephen. It's great to be here.
So today we're going to talk about the keys to persuasive communication to drive sales. And, you know, this is such a very good topic. We just updated our website. We just, went from the old website to the new website. I'm like, whenever I do that, I'm like, I roll my eyes because I'm like, ugh, it's so much work. And, we had to, relook at our copy, make sure it was persuasive, make sure it was concise, make sure it was edited correctly, spelling, all the other stuff, and make sure we had the right keywords in it as well, which kind of sometimes affects persuasiveness as well. So for, SEO purposes. So I completely get the idea of how important the written word is to persuasive communication, not only for your website, but also to drive internal communication and culture. Is that what you think too?
Yeah, absolutely. My background is as a direct response copywriter, meaning for anyone who's listening who doesn't know what that means, writing advertisements basically, and writing ads where we want a prospect or prospective consumer to directly respond to that ad and pick up the phone and call or click the button or whatever. But what I've kind of realized over 11 or so years of doing this is a lot of those same elements that you're using when you write effective ads and effective ad copy are actually pretty universal and apply to a ton of things, whether it's internal communications with your team and setting a vision as a leader and getting a team to buy in to that vision, right? Because we need them to actually buy in, whether it's the copy and comms on our website, press releases, in-person meetings, sales calls, presentations. Really, it's these elements are applicable everywhere. So I definitely agree with you.
It's interesting how you can find a word that can define a company too. Like we worked on this really great project. We had read when I say we, my team, this is a while ago. I had a company that placed travel nurses or registered nurses at hospitals. And we worked on this project where we were kind of coming up with a tagline, so to speak. It was called the book's called The Inside Advantage, which I would highly recommend, by Robert Bloom. He was the founder and CEO of Publicis, which is the largest advertising agency in the world. And I met him, and his book was one of my best books I've ever read. So I had the team read it and we worked on it. But the tagline that we came up with, and this wasn't about finding a tagline, this was also about creating a culture of what we did, was the term was rewarding travel experiences. And that word rewarding was such a key word for how we communicated our vision and to our, not only to our internal staff, but also to our customers. So again, it goes back to the idea of that perfect persuasive word or words that really can help propel your company forward. That was a really good company. That made it Inc. 500 fastest growing companies, and it did well. So what would you say are some of the key elements to make something persuasive?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm gonna make sure I remember that book because it sounds like a good one.
And the other thing that's good about it, it's a small book.
even better. I'll actually
Even
read
better,
it then.
right? I know. But go ahead.
Yeah. So there's a lot. I think one thing is grabbing your audience's attention very quickly. And again, this is universal from my perspective, whether it's B2B, direct to consumer, internal. Like, we want to grab their attention by sort of cutting right to whatever it is that let's just call them our prospect. But again, this could also be a team member. Whatever it is they're dealing with, whatever the pain point is, like, we want to kind of speak to that right away and acknowledge it and acknowledge that we understand it. But we also want to speak to whatever their hopes and dreams are and their core desire is, and demonstrate that we understand that, and that we want to bridge the gap. Be like, hey, right now this thing is lacking, and here's how we're going to get you to where it's not lacking, where you are fulfilled, or where you're even rewarded, right? And so I think you have to do that right out the gate, though, if your communication. Some people do what I call throat clearing, where they sort of have a lengthy preamble and they're all over the place. And it's like, I think being more direct and concise from the very beginning and your opening is really important, because we have only a brief period of time to really capture the attention, the hearts, the emotions, the minds of our prospect, and build that rapport with them. And so that's really crucial. And then it ties into really what I talk about from a copyright perspective, but this is universal too, is the word or acronym WIFM, WIIFM, what's in it for me, right? Because so many times the mistake people make is talking about themselves and their experience and their journey and their struggle. And whether you're getting the buy-in from a team or a prospective customer, it's like they're interested in your story, but they're also, all of us are kind of sitting here like, okay, how does this relate to me and my context? And whether that's an ad, somebody is like, oh, great story, but I'm over here with my whole life to live. So can we get to it? How does this impact me? And for a team member, it's like, well, great, glad that this will help you to reach these goals, but how does it help me to reach my goals, right? We need alignment. So big, impactful openings and answering what's in it for me very early on are two good ones. There's plenty, but those are two good ones to start with.
You think that whenever you're doing some type of communication, whether it be on the website, whether it be, people still do mailers. I've done it. Do you think it's really important to get the copywriter involved, an outside copywriter involved in before or after it's written?
It depends. My bias would be having a good copywriter, write it. I think would be better, because ideally they're an expert, right, and really know what to say and what levers to pull. The copywriter needs to come in and really understand your business and your messaging and your goals and ideal outcomes and everything. So that's why they have to be a good copywriter. A lot of good copywriting is not writing, but it's really research and understanding your market, right? That's a huge part of it. But other times, if that's not an option, then having a copywriter come in after to kind of wordsmith it and rearrange things, or that can definitely be valuable as well.
So when you are making something super persuasive, what was the acronym that you said again? It's what's in it for them, right?
What's in it for me? So with them.
What's in it for me? What's in it for me? Yeah. What do you think when you're about to hire a copywriter? What do you think is something that's important to look for?
So great question, and one that's near and dear to my heart, since I've trained so many copywriters and hired so many. So I want to see that their application, their cover letter should almost be like copy itself, right? So going back to what I said, they should be able to speak to you, the business owner, and demonstrate a knowledge of your business and your market, and understand the challenge that you're facing, which is causing you to reach out and hire a copywriter. And this could just be that your challenge is we want to grow revenue and our advertising is not where it needs to be, right? It could be something more concrete or specific. So I want them to speak to the prospective hirer like they're a prospective customer and really persuade them in their cover letter. I want to see ideally custom samples. I put this out a lot. I think resumes are less important. I think it's totally cool to ask for one, but with a lot of freelance copywriters, especially, they maybe their resume is fine, but I want to see what they can actually do. But if they just send you samples, say you're hiring in the I don't know, like the home services niche, like you're a roofer or a contractor, and they send you samples for like a house supplement thing that they wrote. You're like, well, that's not relevant at all, right? So we want relevant samples from them, but even more importantly, I'd prefer they just go and actually go, hey, look, I studied your business. I've seen some emails or your website. I wrote you a couple hundred words of copy. Like this could go on your website, or here's an email you could send to your customers or an ad. I think the good copywriters do that because it makes you as the business owner, it's much more easy to envision hiring them and working with them and what that would look like if you could see how their copy would apply directly to your needs. And then honestly too, I usually hire in pairs or threes, and I'll hire them on a per project basis to start, test several against each other. And then, if I'm looking for a retainer or ongoing thing after I've tested them a little bit, then I'll offer them that, because it's still really hard to know until they actually start writing for you. If maybe their samples were kind of looked over by some famous copywriter and that's why they're so good. Maybe they have a terrible work ethic, or they're like, freelancers are notoriously bad at hitting deadlines, and they're always moving. I feel like they're always moving whenever the deadline comes, and you're like, how apparently you guys move like every month. But so I think hiring for a few small projects to test them out before you make that big commitment, like date before you marry, is a really important piece of it as well.
Well, what else other than what do you notice that a good copywriter does, other than when you think of a good copywriter, which is give me something that makes sense? What do you think? Like something I think of a good copywriter as somebody who's going to make sure things are edited right and spelled correctly, and that type of thing. But what else does a good copywriter do?
I think a good copywriter, well, they're really capturing the voice, whether that's the voice of a founder or a spokesperson or a brand in general. I think that's really important, and a lot of mediocre copywriters can't do it. Like I've written for like Mike Tyson, Tony Horton, Sir Nick Faldo, like all these famous women, as well as a female doctor named Dr. Claudia Aguirre, who's really cool. And just, but given that it takes a lot of, I don't want to say talent, but practice and skill and nuance to be able to write in a correct voice. And sometimes you're writing for a brand, right? Maybe it's a big venture-backed brand or whatever it is. So a good copywriter can understand that and actually write in the voice of whoever it is that's delivering the message. And it seems like a small thing, but it's very important. That's a really big one. If I had to think of any others, I think it honestly goes back to the research process too. A lot of it is like that and those are tied together, right? Because if I'm writing in your voice, Stephen, I'm going to go listen to all of your podcast episodes. I'm going to find YouTube interviews with you or videos. I'm going to see if there's articles. I'm going to find any content, and I'm going to ask you to get on a call and take an hour to interview you and find out, kind of really so that I'm hearing your voice in my head. But then I'm also going to really research your market on a deep level. And a lot of people want to skip that because the the client might say, hey, yeah, our market's 45 plus men who are interested in weight loss, and they have $100,000 plus median household income. But that doesn't really give you a lot. But if you start going deeper and like, again, what are their hopes and dreams, their passions, their victories and failures, what keeps them up at night, what other products have they tried, what did they like and dislike? I mean, we need to go deeper and really understand that. And a good copywriter will go through that process, and a bad one will usually skip it and just sort of try to write haphazardly.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. So I have a 22-year-old, right? And I have a 13-year-old, but both boys. And but I've always been very involved with my 22-year-old ever since he was very young, talking business with him. And so, over the last couple of years, he has a full-time job. He just got a full-time job now. It's a very good job, but he I was talking to him about company culture, right? And how it's so important to understand when you go to a company to understand this company culture. And I remember when I originally said to him, about this term company culture, and I tried to let him know that what a company culture is it's personality. It's the personality. And I gave him examples, not to belabor this point. But it always has been amazing to me to see when you try to explain somebody company culture, like why companies have culture and why it's so important. It's an inanimate object that you're giving a personality to. And so when you're working with a copywriter, I think one of the side benefits is, or a consultant, uh, uh, you start to learn something about your company that you just didn't. It was there, but you just didn't know it, because the copywriter starts to ask you questions, or a business consultant starts to ask you questions. That forces you to say, "This is what my company is about," and a company personality is a big part of that. So I think the side benefit, what I'm trying to illustrate, is of working with a copywriter, is you start to come up with the idea, what does our company mean? What does it stand for? How do we practice? It's all these critical questions that really becomes a big part of your company, helping it go forward. And it's something that I observed over those 25 plus years. So much so that that you have the second company that I built. No, I'm sorry. The third company I built, I purposely picked the culture before I hired my first employee, and because I wanted to hire into that culture, and I didn't want the culture to be just created once we hired all these people. And the funny part about that is, our hiring was so much better. Our message on our website was so much better. That's the same company that I did that inside in the Inside Advantage book that we did as a team and created the tagline. So, don't you find it fascinating that this creates a persona of a company?
Yeah, I do, but I'm sorry that the doorbell, of course, is going to ring during a podcast.
It's okay.
I'm surprised there's no one here for leaf blower, because that's usually the go-to whenever you're. But yeah, no, I agree. I think you do discover and learn a lot, and through that process and through asking the right questions. And I think in the day-to-day grind of running a business, often you maybe start with some of those values, whether they are very explicitly elucidated or not, but you kind of lose track of them because you're so wrapped up in the operations and growth and sort of those types of things. But actually, I'm going to answer your question, but let me ask you, that company where you kind of elucidated the values from the very beginning and the culture, what was that? You have to share, like, revenue wise, was that one of your best companies? Like, because I would almost guess it was, because of or maybe it was niche and it wasn't, but
it was
it
not.
Just seems like it's so.
Okay. It was a good company. So that was Healthcare Seeker. It was on a 11 million run rate and a year, and that made number 498 on the Inc. 500 fastest growing companies in the United States. And then we got smacked by the 2008 recession, which really affected the industry when we weren't expecting that to happen. And we went from 11 million to 7 million to 3 million to 1 million. And then we closed it, a couple of years later. But however, having said that, if I look at all the companies I had, right, that I have or had, that was the best well-run company who had the best employees I've ever had, the best team, the best execution. If we had stayed in there an additional 3 to 4 years after we closed, which I knew, we would have been back up to 40, 50, $60 million. And I just couldn't handle it at the time. I'd stayed in there for 4.5 years, still at the $1 million mark. The industry didn't change for 8 years. And then it came storming back, which I knew it would. I just had to move. So in answer to your question it was my best company from a well-run standpoint.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I love you sharing the numbers on that, because it's sometimes an idea is perfect, but the timing gets off, right? I mean, so you got to align with like the timing in the market and where the market's at. And so, but yeah, it's really great.
Yeah. The difference too with expert, the two companies I have right now, I have 3 companies now, but the companies I have right now have very little employees. They don't have a lot of employees. That healthcare seeker company had over 100 employees. Okay. So that was, it seems that's a good correlation. When you have a lot of employees, communication becomes even a bigger deal, right? It sounds so obvious saying that, but we all think the spoken communication word, but it's also the written communication as well. So the companies I have right now are purposely made to have very little employees. So I apply those same principles of that I learned in the Inside Advantage book to I have Financing Solutions, which is a dynamite company, and I have Elite Funeral Funding, which is another really good company from a revenue standpoint. And then I own commercial real estate that has nothing to do with any marketing, but so yeah. So they're just kind of different. So yeah. So
Makes sense.
Yeah. So what were you going to say before too?
Well,
You asked me. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was curious because I've found that as even as an entrepreneur, that having those values and a vision in place and effectively communicating that to a team makes a huge difference, right? Those things, and then you're going to laugh at me as a digital marketer, kind of that's my background, but it's like org charts. It sounds so funny, but I'll talk with entrepreneurs and I'm like looking at the companies. Like I have a supplement company that in 2015 did 1 million in revenue. In 2016, we did 23 million in revenue, right? Wow. And there's a lot of reasons that happened, but part of it was like me realizing, I have to actually run a company and be a leader and create real visions and, our real principles and values and communicate a vision. And part of it was like the org chart. And then I own a call center in Las Vegas that does close to 10 million a year right now. And we're looking at growing that more. And it kind of came out of that supplement company. And like the values that we elucidated were like, all over the wall. I mean, they still are, but we're kind of we're looking at, because values do change as well as the company grows, right? So the values you had, some of them stay for a long time, like integrity or things like that. But some things will change as a culture evolves. But I'll look at that stuff. And again, we did like an org chart in 18, 19, and then suddenly, started growing by 70% every year. And you're like, why do I not do that for everything? Like it's so obvious, but as a not formally educated entrepreneur, you sit back and you're like, wow, I should really do this. And so when you were talking about that, you did it the right way with having the values and from the beginning. And then, on the communication side, it's like it's one thing to have vision as the leader, the CEO, as an entrepreneur. It's another thing to communicate that vision and share it. And it's another thing to have people actually buy into that vision, right?
Well, you got to live it. Yeah, you got to live it. You can't just write it down and say, oh, well, now everybody's going to know what it is. You have to live it, in many different ways. Like we would go over with, Healthcare Seeker and my other companies. We would go over, once, maybe it depends on the company, once a month or once a quarter, we would go over what our mission statement was. We would go over what we stood for, what our values were. You got to just go over that so everybody's aware of it. So you learn this stuff. You said the word formally trained. Nobody's formally trained in business. And if you don't go to college to be an entrepreneur, they suck at it. They're just the worst. Okay. You might have one or two colleges in the United States that are pretty good at it. Harvard's really, I think, very, very good at it because it's very practical. Babson College is a really good college. There's some other ones, but those are ones that I think do a really good job of teaching entrepreneurship. but it's all autodidactic. It's all self-taught. But going back to what you're saying is, so what I've noticed is as you grow through revenue, you start to really learn the different size of your company. You start to apply different practices that are more, I hate to use the word professional, but like when you're a small company under $1 million in size, it's you're running the business and stuff like that. Okay. Then you get up to the $3 to $5 million mark, and then you start hiring employees, and you're still involved, but yet you're starting to delegate more. But then when you start getting over to $3 to $5 million revenue, again, it depends on the industry, and you're starting to have more employees, then you have to start building formal processes, and then you start getting into like, also, you have to have KPIs and accounting platforms and all these other things. But on top of that, then you start doing, after 5 million, you start doing mission statements and culture, and your website gets more sophisticated, and you start to have manuals, like, let's use that word loosely, employee manuals and job descriptions and those type of things. And you're not going to get to that level. And if you want to get above, so if you want to jump in revenue, right? If you want to jump in your revenue, it isn't just about getting more clients. It's also about getting more formal in your business. And so I think that's where, where I know that my last two companies I have a business partner who's fantastic. The other companies I did not. So when we started, he had prior businesses too. So when we started Financing Solutions, we were up and running like in 3 months, which would have taken me 3 or 5 years in my other businesses. Like, we were billing with Elite Funeral Funding. We were billing $1 million a month in 4 months. I mean, it was just because we knew all the right things to do. Accounting packages, a great website, knowing the culture, hiring into the culture, all of these things. So it kind of goes back to what you're saying. Have you had that same experience?
Yeah, definitely. I think what I hope is that as an ongoing entrepreneur, I'm trying to be more intentional where I just start a new company, or even when I do start new companies, I guess. I'm like, if I can get this stuff in place at the beginning, I'll be in a much better place. It's what we tend to do is we do what you described. It's us. We kind of hire people haphazardly as we're going, and then at a certain point, we look around and we're like, oh crap, stuff's breaking. And if we want to grow, like revenue can solve a lot of problems, right? And especially profitable revenue, but it can't solve everything because at a certain point, if you're not fulfilling, there's the entire other side of the business. There's fulfillment. There's actually managing cash flow. There's all the things that you've mentioned. And so I've definitely had that experience, and I'm trying to be better about doing it from the beginning. And one reason for me too is I think where I like being is I don't want to be a bottleneck in any of my companies. I want to be able to remove myself. And historically, I've built companies I'm pretty good at generating revenue and building businesses that do that. But then you're like, oh, now I'm the linchpin in everything. How do I remove myself? And you're going in and trying to reverse engineer everything to get yourself out of the business. And so I try to take the mentality now of, let me build it from the beginning to where I can be involved because I want to, and I'm passionate and it's fun and it's exciting, but where I also have a very clear path where I can, remove myself from the day to day and be the chairman of the board, so to speak. But you can't do that unless you have all the things that you're talking about in place. So I really think I know lots of companies, to your point too, doing that 5 to 10 million range where they're sort of doing it, but they're not. And that's really probably the single thing that's keeping them from leaping, significantly in revenue is becoming like a real business, so to speak, and getting that stuff in place.
Well, it's when you get to that 5 and 10 million, what it becomes, I agree with you. And I think what happens is when you get over the 10 million, okay, listen, there's a lot to it. So I don't think it's just one answer. Either you just have a really hot product and you're really doing really, that it's just carrying you. You could, listen, I've seen companies that really suck at what internal stuff, all the stuff we're talking about, right? But they have something that's really hot. and it's just taking off and it's carrying them. And eventually that catches up to you. Like, it's a lot of times when I see owners who sell their company and they've had one company, and I'm like, okay, go do it again and let's see how good you really are, because you could potentially have had a really great product and stuff. Now, most of us fall into the category of we're competing against a lot of people, and then it comes down to incredible execution, right? And the best companies I've ever seen that I know owners of and stuff that have done really well are the ones that are just incredible at execution. And when you get over that $5 or $10 million range, and it's not the product or service that's driving you, it all comes down to incredible execution. And that means details. And I don't think I think that at healthcaresecret.com did a great job with execution. I don't think Financing Solutions and Elite Funeral Funding is like incredible at execution. We are just in a good market, and we're good at what we do, but we also don't have a lot of employees. So the owners are very involved in the businesses, and we're good at what we do. So we don't need to be like teaching others. And I also think, going back to what you were saying, Stefan, too, like, I always thought of processes and procedures. And even, I know it sounds crazy, but the written word throughout your organization is really what the owner of the company, the way that he or she wants things done. And then when you're in that under $10 million range, you are basically, by having written processes, written procedures, really great communication throughout your website, you are making mini me's. That's what you're doing. This is how I would do this. And so you have to, if you wanted to be great at inspection, great at execution, you have to be, as an owner, constantly inspecting that, or hiring a director of staff to constantly be making sure people are doing it the way that you want it done. And then after you get over the $10 million mark, you give people more freedom. I get it. So has that been your experience too?
Yeah, totally. And I think on the written side and the persuasive communication stuff, like, it's like, just think about assembling furniture and the difference between a terrible set of instructions, right, and a really good set of instructions. And it's night and day, right? How the level of frustration, the friction, the speed with which the furniture is assembled, all of those sorts of things. And I think that, going back to, like, even, SOPs and comms internally, things like that, that's why it is so important to be clear and concise, and to really make sure that people can understand. Like, we've all seen, because it's funny, again, going back to these parallels, where if I'm writing to a consumer in almost any kind of advertising environment, I'm generally trying to write at a very low grade reading level, right? Typically, the average American reads at like a 7th or 8th grade reading level. So you really don't want your, copy or your writing to be overly complex. And yet you may have a very intelligent kind of like copywriter or founder or owner or whatever, who loves reading existential philosophy in their spare time, and all that. And so they're writing to themselves, and that's like not the correct way. You need to write to the market. And the same thing with your team members as well. It's like, clearness and clarity and conciseness is just so important, and it makes a difference, I think, between whether your organization quickly gets it and can act on it, or if they're sitting around trying to, like, read the tea leaves and figure out what you meant. So it's really important.
Well, it's really a good subject. I think we took a subject that could be kind of dry and made it interesting, right? And I think that was really the purpose of today. I'd like to thank so very much Stefan Georgi from Copy Accelerator for coming on to today's podcast. If you like today's podcast, please feel free to share it with a friend, and also subscribe on your favorite podcasting app. The Entrepreneur MBA podcast has become very popular. It's listened by thousands of people every single time. And also, if you think that today or any of our other podcasts are good, please give us a 5-star review. That really helps us get the word out. That's the algorithm that they use to determine if if a podcast should be moved up in the rankings, and we would really appreciate that. If you're interested in a business line of credit, please feel free to call us at 862-207-4118 or visit our website at fscreditline.com, FS as in Financing Solutions Creditline.com. It's only a 2-minute application with no documentation. You'll get an offer letter, and it's I think everybody should have a line of credit just in case. Stefan, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, and thank you for having me on. So 2 places. I'm on Instagram, very active there, at Stefan Georgi. So just my name. And then my website, stefanpaulgeorgi.com. And if you go to /subscribe on that website, that's my email newsletter where I email almost every day. And most of the time, don't try to sell you stuff. I just share thoughts on copy, persuasion, marketing, things like that. So it's a pretty valuable resource for people. So those are 2 great ways.
Yep. So Stefan, Stefan, Paul, P-A-U-L. I'm sorry, F-A-N.
Yeah, no problem.
So it's STEFANPAULGEORGI.com.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, great. So, for our listeners out there, I think the thing that I took away from today is you have to work on every part of your business. And if you don't have, if you're working on your copywriting, I think if you're working on redoing your website or doing your website, I think it's really important for you to work on what's your mission now, what is your culture, what are your values, because that's going to come across in the written word that your copywriter is going to use for your website and for what other communications. And I think that that's what really came out today to me was the idea that this is an important part of your business to really drive sales. Right? If you're going to drive your sales, you have to have great communication, persuasive communication, and it all starts with the people that your audience is really reading. So everybody, have a fantastic day. I hope everyone out there is safe and doing well. Make sure you're taking good care of yourself, and I'll see you on the next Entrepreneur MBA podcast.